Our guest today is the congressman from Illinois' 3rd Congressional District. He is a member of 3 House committees: Transportation, Science and Technology, and Small Business. Prior to his election to the House of Representatives, our guest today taught political science at the University of Tennessee and the University of Notre Dame. He earned a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from Northwestern University, a master's degree in engineering and economic systems from Stanford University, and a PhD in political science from Duke University. Our guest today and his wife, Judy, live in Western Springs, Illinois. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the City Club of Chicago, Congressman Dan Lipinski. Congressman?
Thank you. I always start out speeches by warning everybody. I'm a politician now, and we all know why this is the Windy City. But I used to be a professor. I used to teach 3-hour classes. In 3-hour classes that I oftentimes had to fill up 2 hours and 45 minutes by myself speaking. So I can go on for a long time. However, if I'm still up here 3 hours from now speaking, I'll be in a lot of trouble, because 3 hours from now I better be halfway to Washington, D.C., or else I'll be missing a number of votes tonight. So I'll keep this relatively short. Almost a century ago, Carl Sandburg described Chicago as the player with railroads and the nation's freight handler. That's no less true today. But in addition to being a rail hub, Chicago is also an aviation hub and a highway hub. Transportation is, metaphorically and literally, what keeps our region moving. From 1833, when Chicago was first incorporated with about 350 residents, to the vast metropolis of over 8 million people today, transportation has played a key role in Chicago growing and shaping the region. Now, we know transportation is the transportation hub of the nation. From highways to transit to aviation to railroads to waterways, we have it all right here in our backyard. And in today's increasingly competitive global economy, where time really does mean money, and where traffic congestion and delays cost us individually and as a region, our economy and quality of life are dependent on the state of our transportation system. And we see that clearly today. A lot of issues that are going on, which we all know about. I'm sure there'll be a few questions about that later, but we can clearly see how important transportation is. Now, with Chicago's bid for the 2016 Olympics, the potential needs in transportation are growing. There's a need to invest in new projects, a need to maintain what we already have, and a need to plan for the future today instead of when it's too late. While it may seem as though just yesterday we passed the last highway and transit reauthorization bill, which is called Safety Lou, Congress will soon begin work on the next funding bill. Now, as an aside here, I was at the Metropolitan Planning Council, I think last year, and I spoke about Safety Lou. Safety Lou stands for Safe, Accountable, Flexible, Efficient Transportation Equity Act, a legacy for users. What's really important, how did it get Lou at the end? Safety makes sense. Lou is was the wife of the chairman, Don Young, of the committee. So I threw this out there last year. I said, many years from now, I just want all of you to be thinking about this. My wife's name is Judy. So if anyone can come up with an acronym that we could put there at the end of, some long title of a transportation bill, it'll be a few years, though, before I'm chairman of the committee, so you have a little bit of time. Now, Safety Lou expires, it ends at the end of September in 2009. Now, as a transportation hub of the nation, we're in a unique position. We need to plan for the future and start planning for the next highway bill right now, so we can build a regional consensus on what our transportation needs are and put ourselves in the best standing for the reauthorization. Because of this great local need, I asked the House Highway and Transit Subcommittee to hold the first congressional field hearing on the next highway funding bill right here in Chicago. I'm pleased to announce here today that Chairman Peter DeFazio has agreed that we will hold this hearing here in Chicago on October 29th. We'll use this hearing to highlight our regional transportation system today and focus on what our needs may be for 2016 and beyond. This hearing will provide an excellent opportunity for Chicagoland to get a head start on securing the federal transportation funding that our region needs. Now, I understand the importance of transportation to our region. I learned it obviously at my kitchen table, but I also learned it elsewhere. I learned on a job about 20 years ago, probably a little more than 20 years ago. I worked for Baker Engineering as a summer intern on I-290 reconstruction project. I saw the difference that transportation can make to a neighborhood. And I witnessed the revitalization of Midway Airport and the difference it made to my neighborhood, to our region, and to our economy. And I remember the day that the Orange Line opened and how happy people were to have an affordable and easy way to get to work downtown. Now, my only problem with the Orange Line was that it opened too late. All those hours I spent going to school at St. Ignatius on the bus, on the 62 or on the 99 express bus sitting in traffic on the Stevenson Expressway. I wish it had gotten done a little sooner, but no question that was needed and has made a fantastic difference on the southwest side of Chicago. Transportation, really impacts everyone's everyday life and the economy. Given how important transportation is to my district, to the region, to the state, when I was first elected to Congress in 2004, I made it a top priority to try to get a seat on the House Transportation Infrastructure Committee. As you probably know, the Transportation Committee writes the laws that dole out federal transportation funds and regulate every single mode of transportation in this country. In Congress, committees handle most of the legislative work, and to have a seat on the committee, you have a seat at the table when decisions are being made. And when it comes to transportation, it becomes even more critical, especially for Chicagoland. Despite my strong efforts to get on the committee, I did not get on there on my first term. However, I was still able to focus my efforts on reauthorization of the highway bill, and I was pleased, even not being on the committee at that time, to successfully secure over $125 million for a variety of surface transportation projects in the Safety Blue bill, including $100 million for the Chicago Region Environmental and Transportation Efficiency Program, also known as CREATE. This innovative rail modernization project will help alleviate the rail bottleneck in Chicagoland and help benefit commuters and businesses here and across the country. In fact, CREATE was one of only a handful of projects in the Safety Blue bill that was designated by Congress as a project of national and regional significance. Last September, I was joined by the CREATE partners, the Association of American Railroads, Illinois DOT, and Chicago DOT, and other federal, state, and local officials to announce a 3-year, $330 million first phase of CREATE. This includes the $100 million in federal funds that I was able to secure, $100 million from the railroads, a $100 million commitment from the state, and $30 million commitment from the city. Now, CREATE is moving forward, and since we already have the federal contribution and the contribution from the railroads, these funds are being spent. Design and engineering work are currently being conducted, and dirt is being turned. Now, we need to make progress on CREATE. so that when the next transportation bill comes, I am in a better position to make the argument for further and increased federal funding for this project. Now, I believe the job of a public official is to get things done. I mean, that's what I learned, that's what I've always believed. Now, Safety Lou is a textbook case on how bipartisan cooperation can get things done. As former U.S. DOT Secretary Norman Etter once said, there's no such thing as a Democratic or Republican bridge. Now, transportation is an issue that crosses all ideological boundaries, and it's a good thing because of our bipartisan congressional delegation in the state of Illinois. We all worked together hand in hand in the last transportation bill, and we got a 30% increase in funding over the previous bill and over $1.2 billion in earmarks. Now, I've thrown out earmarks. I've talked a little bit about earmarks, and they've been somewhat controversial in recent years. So I want to stop and talk a little bit about my position on earmarks. I 100% support earmarks. Thanks, Bob. Now, honestly, there's been so much talk, and there's been a few bad apples out there people point to and say earmarks are a bad thing. But someone needs to decide where the money is going to be spent. Just recently, what happened this past year with the appropriations bills on a federal level, the earmarks were taken out. All the transportation earmarks that were placed in there were taken out. The money, though, was still spent. Who decided who was going to get that money? Some bureaucrats in the U.S. DOT decided where that $1.1 billion was going to go. It went for congestion projects in only 5 cities across the country. Chicago and Illinois missed out on any of this funding. So someone is always going to decide where money is spent. I think that it is important and it makes sense that a local representative who knows the needs of the area is the one who is going to be there working and helping determine where that money is going to be spent. If we did not earmark, we would not have had the record $832 million transit funding deal for the CTA and Metra in 2000. If we didn't earmark, we would not have had the money, earlier in this decade for the Stevenson Expressway and for Wacker Drive. If we didn't earmark, we wouldn't have the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District's Tunnel and Reservoir Project or the Chicago Shoreline Project. These are all things that rely on earmarked funding. Now, earmarks do a good thing as long as the projects are in the public interest and are transparent. Now, some people may say that it's pork, but as the old saying goes, one person's pork is another person's bacon. So I fully support earmarks. And I think they're critical for us here in the Chicago area. Now, earlier this year, I was appointed to the House Transportation Committee. And the committee, under the leadership of Chairman Jim Oberstar, who is a cycling companion of mine. Jim Oberstar is a big cyclist, and I like to get out a little bit and ride. Under Chairman Oberstar's leadership, we've had a very aggressive and very active timetable for what we're working on. One of our first priorities was to reauthorize the Federal Aviation Administration and the Aviation Trust Fund. After many hearings of the Aviation Subcommittee chaired by Congressman Jerry Costello from downstate Illinois, we passed H.R. 2881, the FAA Reauthorization Act of 2007. This bill will provide a total of $66 billion over 4 years for FAA's capital programs and operations. In addition, we also worked to authorize airports to increase the passenger facility charge from $4.50 to $7. Nationally, it could raise in excess of an additional $1 billion per year. Now, PFCs, for those of you who don't know, passenger facility charges, they were resurrected by Congress in the early 1990s. Who gets credit for this is debated a little bit. Some say that a gentleman who preceded me in representing my district is the one who gets the credit for bringing these PFCs back in the early 90s. Chairman Peter DeFazio has said in a few hearings this year that he was the one who actually was the father of the PFCs. So right now it comes to either Bill Lipinski or Peter DeFazio. I don't disagree with my chairman, Peter DeFazio, so I'll go with Peter right now. Yes, I've told my father that. I think he understands. Now, the 55% increase in PFCs could mean a dramatic increase in capital funds for airports in this region and more money for the O'Hare modernization program. That's why the PFCs are so important to Chicago, is the money that they provide and the money that is needed for the O'Hare modernization project, these PFCs will go towards. But the FAA bill is not only about funding capital projects or funding FAA operations. It's also about R&D investments with an eye towards the future. It's about committing federal resources to work on solving today's issues before they become tomorrow's problems. Now, I wrote a provision and got included in the House bill a provision that will create a FAA Center of Excellence for research and development of alternative jet fuels. Now, right now, emissions from aircraft account for roughly 3 or 4% of greenhouse gas emissions. However, there's an expectation is that not only domestic, but especially worldwide air travel is going to increase tremendously. So I believe it's something we need to be proactive on. And the European Union is working on putting restrictions and requiring that airlines lower their greenhouse gas emissions in order to be able to fly into and out of Europe. So that is why we need to be working right now on alternative jet fuels, as we're working on alternative fuels for vehicles, for automobiles and trucks. We need to be doing that for aircraft, and that is why I helped to put this in that bill. Now, this FAA bill, we're bringing it to the House floor this week. So I expect that this week we will get it passed. But the Senate has not yet considered their version of the bill, so we still have a long road ahead. And what this is going to mean is, since it's at the end of this month that the old bill expires, we're going to have to pass a short-term extension to keep the aviation funds flowing. But I'm very hopeful that by the end of the year, we can have the FAA reauthorization passed. Now, one thing that we're all aware of, and I was talking about earlier today to some of you, was the bridge tragedy in Minnesota. After that tragedy, Chairman Jim Oberstar proposed a new National Bridge Trust Fund to pay for reconstruction of bridges on our national highway system. We already held one hearing on this last 2 weeks ago, and we'll be holding another hearing soon. While funding levels have not yet been determined, this could potentially mean billions of dollars in new funds for bridge reconstruction work. So I'm very hopeful. We do have a great need out there for bridges and for other infrastructure. And this tragedy has really shown us, pointed out to us again. I'm very hopeful that we keep the momentum going and we do step forward and we do show the resolve to pass this bridge bill and provide this needed funding for safety of our infrastructure. Now, one other thing I want to talk about is Amtrak reauthorization. I really believe that intercity passenger rail is a key component to a multimodal transportation system. About 20 years ago, I worked on a short-term contract for Swissair in Zurich, Switzerland. I worked as a systems analyst. When I was there, I was very impressed and took great advantage of the rail system in Europe. Now, the United States is definitely different from Europe, no question about that. But I do believe that we can take greater advantage of intercity rail transportation if we are willing to invest in it. We also need to take a closer look at how the federal government can play a more effective role in expanding service in states like Illinois. So regions in Illinois like Rockford, the Quad Cities, and Peoria can get passenger rail service. Now, the state of Illinois itself has invested in rail, increased the Amtrak trains running in the state of Illinois, and the ridership has really been there for that. I think that more needs to be done on the federal level for Amtrak, and I'm looking forward to the reauthorization of Amtrak in this Congress, which we'll be working on. Now, it's also important, one other thing talking about Amtrak, high-speed rail, I think is also very significant. And it's something Chairman Oberstar is very interested in. I think there's great opportunities here in the Midwest for high-speed rail. In T21, which was a couple of highway funding bills ago, Congress designated the Chicago hub as a high-speed rail corridor. While it was a good step forward, it didn't provide the adequate funding to make the necessary investments to really bring about high-speed rail. Now, I believe more needs to be done on this, and we're really going to be looking at this on the federal level of putting more funding into high-speed rail and making it a reality in this country, just as it is in many places in Europe and also in Asia. And like I said, I think the federal government needs to do more when it comes to rail. That's why this year I worked to include $35 million in the House-passed Transportation Appropriations Bill for the rail line relocation program. In Safety Lieu, this was authorized. However, no money had been appropriated for a rail line relocation program up until this point. I worked with the chairman of the subcommittee, John Olver, and got the $35 million put in there. And what this could be used for are grants for things such as grade separations, improvements for quiet zones, other passenger-related projects. So I'm very happy and very proud I was able to get that funding in there to do more for rail. It's definitely something that's needed. So, like I said, we need to start laying the groundwork now for the next highway bill. And, you know, we saw last highway bill, $285 billion. The one before that, $218 billion. Before that, $155 billion. Going by the trajectory of where we've been going, I think this next bill will easily be over $300 billion. It's very important that we are there, we are working on this, and we are ready to move forward to capture as much of that funding as possible. Just as Mayor Daley has looked towards the future by leading our region with this 2016 Olympics bid, we have to have the same type of visionary leadership when it comes to transportation for our region. And with the prospect of the 2016 Olympics, Mayor Daley has publicly said that the key is transportation, and I could not agree more. We have to start planning for the future. We all know the issues and we all know the problems. What we need are good ideas on how the federal government can help Chicagoland keep moving forward to help us prepare for the Olympics and to plan for the future of the region. As I mentioned earlier, that's why I called for the House Subcommittee on Highway and Transit to hold an October field hearing here in Chicago on our regional transportation needs for the 2016 Olympics and beyond. Not only will this be the first ever Highway Subcommittee field hearing in Chicago, this will also be the first field hearing that will be used to prepare for the reauthorization of the next highway funding bill. Now, just as the 1893 World's Fair put Chicago on the world's map and left a legacy for Chicago, I think the 2016 Olympics can leave an important transportation legacy here in Chicagoland. And with the upcoming reauthorization bill, that is the place to start. And we have a tremendous opportunity to use that bill in order to get some of the important funding we need here for transportation. Now, transportation is our history, and for this generation, it can be our legacy. And what we do looking at the 2016 Olympics should not just be about the Olympics, but about a legacy for the future and where we are going and what we can do and what we can leave for future generations. A good transportation system, an improved transportation system in place for the Chicagoland region and be a great advantage in so many ways for everyone who lives in the area. So I very much look forward to that hearing upcoming and to the future and where we're going with transportation in the Chicago area. Thank you.
We have a couple of questions. Ms. Ponder, well,
I got beaten by someone. That's okay. I can go second.
Thank
I
you.
can go second.
My name is Nance Dulay, and I live in the Congressman's district. And I wanted to say he joined us in the 3.5 walk last week on the southwest side. And we have had many improvements. You're very efficient in handling everything, and your staff is great. I wanted to ask a question about 71st Street. And also, we...
short questions, he has to catch a plane.
Right. Bus 162 used to go all the way express downtown from 81st down Pulaski. But anyway, what is going to happen to 71st Street? We don't have access from Pulaski to Cicero, and there is a viable street. And we're wondering, why nothing has been done about that, because everybody has to turn north and south at Pulaski, and it's during the rush hour, it's real traffic.
Well, there are definitely
Thank you.
problems out there in terms of that location, all that location around the rail yard. With the roads there certainly are problems, and one of the biggest ones, as many of you know, is also Central Avenue, in getting Central Avenue, a project that's been talked about for 35 years, which I'm working on right now. There's no way to get through this rail yard for 3 miles. Central Avenue is an important project also, and I think this is all part of getting the roads and the transportation area fixed in that part of Chicago.
Kathy Posner, Board of Governors of City Club. When you're explaining the difference between earmarking and pork, people think, of course, this pork is just for us here, where earmarking might be for, a larger area. And since we are a transportation hub, it's a larger area. So actually, pork is just us depending on you or a Judy. But an earmark would be a non-Judy. So here's a way that you could use your wife's name is just us depending on you, J-U-D-Y, is pork. So you're doing a
Very good.
non-Judy when you're earmarking it.
Thank
so
you.
that's my help to you for your safety, Lou.
Very good.
I don't know how to follow that.
That's a tough one.
I'm Morgan Carter from Omnibus Television and CCN Network. You mentioned leadership starting now and a lot of money. What most people are concerned with is how do you get people in the city and move them from the different venues if we get 2016. You mentioned a high-speed rail. So is this hearing, do you have any specific things you're going to want to improve or move to improve so we can barely get around the city now. So I'm curious how we start and what you're going to do. Thank you.
Well, that's why we need to start planning now. I mean, 2016 is 9 years away, but if we don't start the planning now, we will not get the kind of systems that we need to have. That's why we really have to look at the system we have right now, and if we do get the Olympics, what is going to be needed. Obviously, public transportation is going to be really the most critical part of that, and specifically on how we're going to do that. That's why I want to hold the hearing. So we're going to bring people in to talk about more specifics on what they want to see and what's going to be needed for the Olympics. But the planning needs to start right now to get these things done.
Go ahead, Jeff. You've never been reticent before.
I was waiting
You
for
must
your
scare
cue.
him, Paul.
I do. Well, 10 seconds, then you ask your question.
Jeff Berkowitz, host and producer of Public Affairs, airing every Monday night at 8:30, including tonight on Cable Channel 21. One of our past guests, Congressman Dan Lipinski. Congressman Lipinski, you and Mark Kirk, Congressman Kirk, seem to have adopted the Iraq Study Group as a path out of Iraq, or a path forward out of Iraq, however you put it. And part of that seems to be a wind down, a quick and sharp withdrawal of troops by the United States. and also part of that apparently is a diplomatic surge that you favor. I'm wondering, what's the leverage the United States would have with its coalition forces to negotiate, to exercise that diplomatic surge? What leverage would it have, and with whom would the United States be negotiating its way out of Iraq?
Now, what I'm talking about there, and I'll try to keep this one short, what I'm talking about is the United States needs to be willing to sit down with people in the countries in the region, in the Middle East, but also to talk more with other nations. We see this now. We see France starting to talk a little bit more about Iraq and the importance of it and being willing to step forward. And I'm not talking about U.S. sitting down and negotiating. The first thing you need to do is to be willing to reach out to other countries and work in a multilateral fashion. And I think that we have not been doing that in the last few years, and that's where we need to start. And that's where the diplomatic surge starts, is just being willing to work together, because Iraq is not only an issue for the United States, but also an issue for that region and for most of the rest of the world. The impact of the war certainly affects them also. And they should be willing, but I think the United States has, to some extent, scared off other countries and made them unwilling to really want to cooperate, and just thrown it in our laps that it's your war, you deal with it. And
By
I think
saying
we
that you're getting
need to
out,
get
does,
beyond that.
by saying that you're getting out, does that induce them to go ahead and negotiate with you?
Well, again, we're not negotiating with anyone. We're trying to bring people together. That is what I'm looking at, is bringing people together, bringing other nations together to help solve what is going on in Iraq and in the region, because this extends beyond the borders of Iraq. So it's not negotiation. It's not telling people. It's not the United States saying, you're gonna do this. We need you to do that. It's how can we cooperate? And I think cooperation is what has really been lacking for a number of years in this war.
Thanks.
Congressman Richard Boykin, I want to personally applaud you for your leadership and your commitment to Illinois. I also want to thank you for the $800,000 earmark for Cook County that will help residents of Cook County feel a little bit better once they go to bed at night, knowing that Homeland Security issues are well taken care of. I wonder if you might talk, though, Congressman, about the current tone of Congress and where you see things going. I mean, how soon will you guys adjourn? And, what do you see for the presidential election?
Okay, so boy, that's an even tougher one to try to be short on. I don't like, in general, since I came to Congress, I have not been happy with the tone because there is not enough. Well, there isn't trust, and that certainly takes some time to build again, but not trust across the aisle, which I think is detrimental to the country as a whole. I'm very happy that Illinois has continued to work together. Congressional delegations continue to work well together, Democrats and Republicans, but there's not enough of that going on in Congress for the betterment of the country. I think that right now I don't see the prospect for Congress being done before Christmas this year, which is very unfortunate. We are not getting enough time to come back to spend with our constituents. I'm back home every single weekend, but that is not enough time to be at home, not to mention be at home with my wife, which is very important to me, but also to be here. Presidential election, I still think that's Democrats certainly are looking good in that, but things can change, and I don't think we know anything for sure about that, and I think it's a very fluid situation.
Thank you.
Hello, Congressman. I'm John Barry from J.P. Morgan, and our firm has endorsed end of the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, and I believe it's coming up sometime this week or next week. I just want to know if you had a position or how you plan to vote for that.
I have not yet taken a position on the Employment Non-Discrimination Act. There is no question, and I have stated this, that there should not be, people should not be discriminating based on sexual orientation, when it has nothing to do at all with the job someone may do in their business. Now, ENDA goes a little further than that, and there's some things that I'm still looking at on that, but I have not yet decided how I'm going to vote on it.
To close, go ahead, sir.
Fritz Plaus of Corridor Capital. Congressman, we appreciate your support for Amtrak and for CREATE. Outside of those two programs, however, what do you estimate as the chances that legislation will emerge, veto-proof legislation will emerge from this session of Congress for a bill setting up a federal-state matching program to provide states like Illinois, which have gone out in front with their own funds, to build railroad infrastructure, that they will get a capital match from the federal government? Thank you.
Well, in terms of in that regard, for programs such as that, I don't think right now in this year that it's going to be done. I think as we're, again, looking towards the next reauthorization bill, there is a greater likelihood of that happening right now with the committee. The Transportation Committee certainly is looking more favorably on that right now than in the past, I think just because of the change in the majority. But we're still going to have to wait and see if we're going to be able to get something like that done. But again, I think looking to the next reauthorization bill is where we really have to focus on to get changes like that made.
Dan, every professor in Congress needs a cup for coffee, some light reading on the plane, the history of the City Club of Chicago, and a one-year membership in the City Club of Chicago, which is now known as CCC-Co. Jay's wife is Colleen. All right, we are adjourned.
Thank you.
Great job.